A masked man is standing at the front door of an 84-year-old woman's home at 2 in the morning. He is armed. He is wearing gloves. He has a backpack strapped to his shoulders. And in his pocket, investigators believe, is a device designed to jam wireless signals to cut the house off from the outside world, before anyone inside has a chance to call for help. The doorbell camera captures all of it. The image is grainy but clear enough to see the gun. Clear enough to see him raise his hand and press leaves against the camera lens, not smashing it, not cutting the wire, but covering it. Slowly, deliberately, as if he does not need to rush, as if he already knows he has all the time he needs. His name is unknown, his face is hidden. But the FBI has studied every frame of that footage, and what they found, or more precisely, what they did not find, has led investigators to a theory that reframes everything we thought we knew about how Nancy Guthrie was taken. If this case has been on your radar, you have seen that footage. You have seen the masked figure and probably assumed the same thing most people assumed, that this is the man who broke in and took her. But here is what almost no one is talking about. That front door has a metal security gate, heavy iron, the kind that does not yield, the kind that, according to law enforcement experts who have examined the property, is nearly impossible to break through from the outside. So if that gate was not broken, and it was not, then either someone opened it from inside, or the man at the camera was never planning to come through the front door at all. That question, who opened the gate, or who was already inside, is what a group of former FBI agents, investigators, and law enforcement experts are now publicly saying may be the key to this entire case. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for over 47 days. Her blood was found near the entrance to her home. Multiple ransom notes have been sent to media outlets. The FBI is offering $100,000 for information. And as of this recording, no arrest has been made. If you want to follow every development on this case as it unfolds, subscribe to Deadly Tales Liam, and hit the bell because this investigation is moving. And when something breaks, you will want to know immediately. Weeks before that February morning, something quietly unusual was already happening outside Nancy Guthrie's home in Tucson's Catalina foothills. According to retired Pima County homicide detective Kurt Dabb, the man investigators would later dub Porch Guy appeared on Nancy's Google Nest camera not once, but on multiple occasions in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. That detail has not been widely emphasized in the mainstream coverage, but it should be, because it means that whoever took Nancy Guthrie did not stumble onto her home by accident. They found it, they watched it, they came back, and then, when they were ready, they came back one final time. Nancy Ellen Long was born on January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky. She had lived in the Tucson area for more than 5 decades, having moved there with her family in the early 1970s. By the time of her disappearance, she was 84 years old, a widow, living alone in the quiet suburban neighborhood she had called home for most of her adult life. She is the mother of 3 adult children, including Savannah Guthrie, co-host of NBC's Today Show. Her routine was ordinary and consistent in the way that the lives of people who have lived long and settled lives tend to be predictable in its rhythms, familiar to those around her. She attended church. She spent time with family. She had dinner with her daughter Annie on the evening of January 31st and spent the night playing games before Annie drove her home. That detail matters, not because there was anything unusual about it, there was not, but because it establishes something important. Someone who had been watching Nancy's home would have had ample opportunity to learn her patterns. When she left, when she returned, when the lights went out, when the house went quiet. The FBI has since returned to the neighborhood multiple times to ask residents questions, not just about what they saw on the night of February 1st, but about dates going back to January 11th and January 24th. Investigators have also asked neighbors about former residents who moved out of the area in the weeks just before Nancy disappeared. They have asked about houses under construction nearby, requesting the names of contractors and workers who had access to the neighborhood. Former FBI agent Steve Moore has publicly stated that this kind of retracing is not a sign that the investigation is stalled. It is a sign that agents have a direction and are following it carefully. What that direction is, authorities have not said. But the questions they are asking paint a specific picture. Someone who knew this neighborhood, who may have had a reason to be in it, who understood the layout of the streets, the sight lines, the routines of the people who lived there. Annie dropped Nancy off that night. They said goodnight. The porch light went on. The door closed. And somewhere in the dark hours that followed, the house that Nancy Guthrie had lived in for decades became the scene of something violent. Her blood would later be found near the entrance. The cameras on her property, the ones pointed at the pool, the backyard, the side yard captured thumbnail images of people moving through the yard in the days before she vanished. Nothing in those images appeared suspicious to investigators, but someone had been there, multiple times. And they had not been afraid of the cameras at all. The Pima County Sheriff's Department received the missing persons report on the morning of February 1st, 2026, after Nancy Guthrie failed to appear at church, a commitment she kept with enough regularity that her absence was immediately noticed by family. When deputies arrived at her home in the Catalina foothills, they found evidence of a violent struggle. Blood belonging to Nancy was found near the front entrance to the property. She was not there. The house was empty in the way that houses feel when someone has been removed from them against their will, not abandoned, but emptied. The FBI was brought in quickly. The multi-agency investigation that followed would involve the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and multiple search and rescue teams. What they found in those first hours set the tone for everything that followed. The doorbell camera footage was recovered, or rather, a version of it was. The limitations of the camera's hardware had initially made it difficult for law enforcement to reconstruct a full picture of what had happened. But by February 10th, the FBI's Phoenix office had processed enough of the footage to release still images and a short video clip showing the masked individual at Nancy's front door in the early morning hours of February 1st. FBI Director Kash Patel posted the images publicly. The figure in the footage is wearing a mask. He is carrying what the FBI describes as a black 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack, a private label brand sold exclusively at Walmart. He has a gun in a holster, and he appears to have an additional object in one of his pockets that investigators have described as possibly a signal jammer, a device capable of disrupting wireless communications in the immediate vicinity of the home. He raises his hand to the camera. He presses something against the lens. Leaves, it appears. Not a spray. Not a bag. Leaves. As if this was improvised in that moment, or as if it simply did not matter whether the camera was fully obscured, because the outcome was already assured. The FBI described him as 5'9" to 5'10" tall, of average build. They released the information publicly and asked for tips. Within weeks, they had received more than 13,000. None of them led to an arrest. On February 2nd, KOLD-TV, a CBS affiliate in Tucson, reported receiving a letter demanding payment for Nancy's release. CBS News reported that investigators reviewed the letter, considered it seriously, and shared it with the FBI. Authorities declined to confirm whether the letter was genuine. Multiple ransom notes followed, sent to various media outlets, demanding payment in cryptocurrency, describing consequences in graphic terms if demands were not met. TMZ reported receiving what they described as a highly sophisticated demand involving a cryptocurrency other than Bitcoin, with a dollar amount similar to a figure of approximately $6 million referenced in an earlier communication. The FBI has not confirmed the validity of any of these notes. What they have confirmed is that a California man named Derek Colella, 42 years old, was charged with sending a hoax ransom message to Nancy's oldest daughter, Annie, and her son-in-law. One fake note does not mean all the notes are fake. It means the investigation has had to work through layers of noise to find the signal. On February 13th, a delivery driver named Luke Daly was detained for several hours by Pima County sheriffs, deputies, and questioned by the FBI after a court-authorized search of his home in Rio Rico, Arizona. A gray Range Rover was seized from a nearby parking lot and towed away. Daly was released. He later told reporters he had nothing to do with Nancy's disappearance. The FBI kept searching, and the more they searched, the more a particular question kept surfacing, one that nobody in the initial coverage had thought to ask. That question starts with a gate, a metal security gate bolted to the front of Nancy Guthrie's home, positioned in front of her main door. It is the kind of gate that is common in certain neighborhoods in the American Southwest, heavy, reinforced, designed to be a barrier. And according to law enforcement experts who have analyzed the property and the footage in the weeks since Nancy disappeared, it is, in the words now circulating among investigators, nearly impossible to break through from the outside. Read that again slowly. nearly impossible to break through from the outside. Now look at the footage again. The masked man is standing at the front door. He is pressing leaves against the camera. He is armed. He is equipped. He appears to be waiting. He is not breaking the gate. He is not prying it open. He is not even attempting to force his way through it. He is standing there, waiting. And that waiting, which most viewers initially read as patience, or as the calm of a criminal who knows he is in control, investigators are now beginning to read very differently. Former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell, speaking to NewsNation correspondent Brian Enton, put it plainly. She does not believe Nancy walked out of that house. She believes Nancy was carried out by at least 2 people. She pointed to the blood found near the entrance, specifically the location and pattern of it, and described a scenario in which 2 individuals were supporting or carrying an unconscious or incapacitated elderly woman, and the blood appeared at the threshold because her head tilted forward as she was moved through the doorway. That image is not a comfortable one, but it is the image that the physical evidence, according to O'Connell, most clearly supports. And if it is accurate, then the man at the front door was not the primary actor in what happened inside that house. He was the last piece of a plan that was already unfolding when the camera caught him. Retired Pima County homicide detective Kurt Dabb, speaking exclusively to Parade magazine on March 19th, said he does not believe the person at the front door acted alone. In his professional estimation, he said, the operation required between 2 and 4 accomplices. The logistics, he explained, of something of this magnitude are simply too much for one person to manage. And Dabb added something else, something that connects the gate, the waiting figure, and the weeks of surveillance that apparently preceded the abduction. It is more than likely, he said, that the home was canvassed prior either by the person at the door or by someone working with him. Whether or not the suspect knew about the camera at the front was, in Dabb's assessment, part of that reconnaissance. So here is what the evidence now suggests, taken together. Someone studied this house. Someone came back multiple times. Someone appeared on the Google Nest camera weeks before the abduction. And on the night of February 1st, the man captured on the doorbell camera did not try to break through the front gate because the front gate was never the way in. That raises a question the investigation has not yet publicly answered. If he did not come through the front, then where did he come in? And if there was someone already inside that house when he arrived who let them in, and when? The FBI's investigation in the weeks following Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has moved across several distinct layers of physical and forensic evidence, each one revealing more complexity and, so far, leaving the central question unanswered. The first and most significant layer is DNA. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed to NBC News that investigators had found what he described as mixed DNA inside Nancy's home, genetic material that did not belong to Nancy herself, or to individuals known to have been in regular contact with her. The sheriff acknowledged that the sample potentially contained DNA from multiple individuals, and that processing a mixed DNA profile is one of the more technically challenging problems in forensic science. The analysis was sent to a private laboratory in Florida. As of this recording, no match has been confirmed publicly. Separately, investigators are applying investigative genetic genealogy, IgG, to the DNA evidence recovered from the scene. IgG is the same technology that helped law enforcement identify the Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo, after more than 3 decades. It is also the method that led investigators to Brian Kohberger in the University of Idaho murders. Genetic genealogist C.C. Moore, who has worked on high-profile cases using this technology, stated publicly that she finds it very hard to believe the perpetrator in this case did not leave DNA behind at the scene. The technology works by comparing an unknown DNA profile to publicly available genetic databases, then identifying relatives of the unknown individual and working outward through family trees. It has broken cases that had gone cold for decades. Whether it will work here and how quickly depends on what is in the sample and whether the suspect has any relatives who have submitted their genetic data to consumer genealogy platforms. The second layer of evidence involves the gloves. In the weeks following Nancy's disappearance, a total of 16 pairs of gloves were found in the area surrounding her home. Most of them were traced back to members of the volunteer search teams operating in the neighborhood. One pair, however, was different, a pair of black gloves found approximately 2 miles from the property, which appeared to match the gloves worn by the suspect in the doorbell camera footage. DNA was extracted from these gloves. It did not match any entry in the FBI's National Genetic Database, CODIS. Further analysis was conducted. The DNA was eventually traced to a local restaurant worker who, Sheriff Nanos confirmed, is not considered part of the investigation. The sheriff did note, however, that other DNA evidence was still being analyzed at the private lab in Florida. The trail from the gloves went cold, but it did not end the DNA investigation. The third layer involves surveillance, not just the footage from Nancy's property, but the broader network of cameras in the neighborhood. Investigators asked residents to check their own security footage going back weeks. A neighbor's doorbell camera, located approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home, captured footage of a car moving at speed along Camino Real at 2:36 in the morning on February 1st, just hours before Nancy was reported missing. According to a Fox News digital report, authorities were aware of the footage and were looking into the vehicle. Sheriff Nanos said his department was examining that car, along with hundreds of thousands of other vehicles that were on the road at that hour. No identification of the vehicle has been publicly confirmed. Additionally, investigators reviewed security camera footage from two of Nancy's neighbors on specific dates, January 11th and January 24th. The reason those particular dates were flagged has not been disclosed. Former FBI agent Steve Moore has been explicit about what this kind of detailed, backward-looking surveillance review typically signals. Agents are not retracing steps because they are lost. They are retracing because something in the timeline has shifted, and they now know more precisely what they are looking for. The FBI has also canvassed the neighborhood multiple times in recent weeks, asking residents about former neighbors who moved out of the Catalina foothills shortly before Nancy disappeared, and requesting the names of contractors and construction workers who had been working on homes in the area. Moore noted that the focus on construction workers was particularly significant. Access to a neighborhood during active construction is often unrestricted. Workers move in and out. Vehicles park for extended periods without drawing attention. Someone learning the layout of a neighborhood, its sightlines, its routines, its security vulnerabilities could do so relatively easily under the cover of work. No contractor or former neighbor has been publicly named as a suspect, but the questions being asked point in a specific direction. And when you combine that direction with what investigators are now saying about the front gate and the back door, the picture that emerges is not of a single desperate individual who acted impulsively. It is something far more calculated, and that has opened a set of contradictions in this case that no one has yet been able to fully explain. There is a specific kind of frustration that sets in when investigators keep finding things that point somewhere without quite arriving. That is exactly where this case has been sitting for weeks. The FBI has tips. The FBI has DNA. The FBI has footage. And yet the most basic question, who took Nancy Guthrie and where is she now, remains publicly unanswered. But frustration in an investigation is not the same as stagnation. And the contradictions that have emerged in recent weeks are not signs that the case is falling apart. They are signs that the case is forcing investigators to revise what they thought they understood about the night of February 1st and about the people who may have been involved. The first contradiction sits at the center of the entire investigation. Sheriff Chris Nanos has publicly and repeatedly stated that this was a targeted crime, not random, not opportunistic. Someone chose this house, this woman, this night. And yet, in the same breath, Nanos has warned the public not to assume they are safe, simply because it was the Guthrie family who was targeted. Those two statements can both be true, but they create a tension that has never been fully resolved in the public record. If the motive was specific to Nancy or her family ransom tied to her daughter's public profile, for instance, then the threat to others is theoretical at best. But if the motive was something else, something that has not yet been disclosed, then Nanos's warning carries a different weight entirely. The sheriff has said his department believes it knows why this happened. He has declined to say more. That silence is deliberate. It is also one of the most significant unresolved threads in this entire case. The second contradiction involves the profile of the suspect himself. Former FBI agent Steve Moore, speaking publicly in mid-March, described the man captured on camera as anything but a sophisticated criminal. The way the gun was holstered outside the pants, positioned incorrectly, struck Moore as the work of someone performing an idea of intimidation rather than someone trained in it. The use of leaves to obscure the camera, rather than any technical countermeasure, suggested improvisation. Moore's conclusion was direct. The reason this person has not been caught is not because they are brilliant. It is more likely, he said, a combination of interagency communication gaps and circumstantial luck on the part of the perpetrator. And yet, a signal jammer, if confirmed, is not the tool of someone acting on impulse. A backpack sourced from a specific retail chain, a specific volume, a specific brand that is either a detail that means nothing or a detail that means someone went shopping for this. Weeks of surveillance on the property, multiple visits captured on camera before the night in question. These are not the behaviors of an amateur who got lucky. They are the behaviors of someone who prepared. The contradiction between amateur execution and calculated preparation has not been explained. It may never be fully explained unless and until someone is arrested and the full picture becomes available. The third contradiction is the one that has received the least attention, and it may be the most important. The FBI has been asking about people who left the neighborhood just before Nancy disappeared. Former neighbors. People who had reason to be in the area and then were not. The significance of that line of inquiry has been underplayed in most of the national coverage. Think about what it implies. If investigators are asking who recently left, they are not just trying to rule people out. They are constructing a map of who had access, who had knowledge, and who chose to be somewhere else when things went wrong. Access to a home like Nancy's, a reinforced gate, cameras in multiple locations, a woman who had lived in the same place for decades, is not something a stranger stumbles into. Someone knew where the cameras were pointed. Someone knew which entrance was vulnerable. Someone knew the rhythms of the house well enough to time an entry. And now the FBI is asking who, in the weeks before February 1st, quietly disappeared from the neighborhood where Nancy Guthrie had lived for 50 years. Here is what former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell believes happened inside that house. She has said it clearly, in her own words, and it changes the entire frame of what the doorbell footage shows. She does not think the man at the front door came in through the front. She thinks someone was already inside. She thinks that person or those people had already subdued Nancy before the masked figure ever appeared on camera. And she thinks the man at the door was there for one specific purpose: to cover the camera so that whatever condition Nancy was in when she was brought out would not be visible to anyone reviewing the footage later. That is the backdoor theory. And it is not speculation pulled from a forum or a social media thread. It comes from a retired federal agent who spent years working cases for the FBI, applying the same logic she was trained to apply. Start with the physical evidence. Work backward to the most coherent explanation. The physical evidence here includes a metal gate that was not forced. It includes blood found at the threshold, in a pattern consistent, according to O'Connell, with someone being carried rather than walking. It includes a suspect who pressed leaves against a lens, rather than disabling a camera behavior that makes far more sense if his job was cover and concealment rather than entry. And it includes the fact that the cameras covering the back of the property, the pool, the side yard recovered by the FBI weeks into the investigation showed people moving through those areas before the abduction. Nothing appeared suspicious, investigators said, but the cameras were there. And if someone had been through that yard before, they would have known exactly what those cameras could and could not see. Nancy's neighbor, a woman identified publicly only as Laura, told NewsNation correspondent Brian Enton that she does not believe the man at the front was trying to get in at all. In her assessment, drawn from knowing the property and the gate firsthand, the figure outside was waiting for a door to be opened from within, waiting for an accomplice already inside, to bring Nancy out so that he could assist in removing her. Laura's theory is not based on forensic training, but it aligns in every structural detail with what O'Connell described independently. Two people, from entirely different vantage points, arriving at the same conclusion. Retired homicide detective Kurt Dabb went further. In his professional judgment, the complexity of removing an 84-year-old woman from a secured home in the middle of the night, transporting her without detection, and managing the logistical demands of an ongoing kidnapping situation, ransom communications, avoiding capture, maintaining control of a vulnerable person who requires daily heart medication, is simply not a one-person operation. He put the likely number of individuals involved at somewhere between 2 and 4, and then there is the reconnaissance. Weeks of it, visits to the property before the night in question. Specific dates, January 11th, January 24th, that investigators flagged as significant enough to pull camera footage from, neighboring properties, If those dates correspond to earlier visits by one or more of the people involved, then what happened on February 1st was not the beginning of the operation. It was the end of a planning process that had been running for at least 3 weeks. Taken together, this is what the backdoor theory actually proposes, that the man the world has been watching on that doorbell footage was not the primary actor. He was the final step of a coordinated plan. Someone else, or more than one, someone else was already in that house. They came in through a different entrance. They may have had knowledge of the property that a stranger would not possess. And the figure at the front, armed and gloved and pressing leaves against a camera at 2 in the morning, was there to make sure that when Nancy came out, no one would see her clearly enough to know what had been done to her. The investigation has not confirmed this theory, but the FBI is actively examining it. And the gate, that heavy, reinforced, unbroken gate, is why. 47 days into the search for Nancy Guthrie, here is what is known with certainty. She was taken from her home in the early hours of February 1st. Her blood was found at the threshold. A masked individual was captured on camera outside the front of her property. The FBI has amassed thousands of hours of footage, processed tips numbering in the tens of thousands, deployed billboards across 4 states, and applied some of the most sophisticated DNA technology available in modern forensic science. They have a dedicated homicide team. They have federal resources. They have the full weight of a case that has drawn attention from the White House, from the national media, and from the public in a way that few missing persons cases ever do. Sheriff Nanos has said his team is closer than they have ever been. He has said they believe they know the motive. He has said the investigation is presuming Nancy is still alive and that the dedicated team will continue until she is found or every lead is exhausted. The family has offered a reward of $1 million for information leading to her recovery. They have donated $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, a gesture that speaks to both their resources and, perhaps, their awareness of what outcomes are possible. Savannah Guthrie, who stepped away from her role at the Today Show the morning her mother was reported missing, posted on Instagram in early March with words directed at the Tucson community and at anyone following the case. She asked people not to stop praying. She asked them to keep hoping. She asked, simply, for her mother to be brought home. The ransom notes, the ones investigators have not confirmed as genuine, the ones whose deadlines have passed without resolution, remain an open wound in this investigation. If any of them are real, then somewhere out there, someone is waiting. If they are all fabrications, then the motive for keeping Nancy alive shifts, and the question of where she is becomes harder to answer. One thing is clear. The investigation is not treating this as a closed chapter. Cadaver dogs, which had been part of the search operation, were stood down, but Sheriff Nanos said they remain available if needed. The private DNA lab in Florida is still processing evidence. The neighborhood canvassing continues, and the question of who was in that house before the man with the leaves arrived at the front door has not been answered publicly. It may be the question that breaks this case open, or it may be the question that takes the longest to answer. Either way, it has not gone away. What this case teaches us about the gap between visible security and actual security is something worth sitting with. Nancy Guthrie's home had a reinforced front gate. It had a doorbell camera. It had motion-activated cameras covering the pool, the backyard, and the side yard. By any ordinary measure, it was a secured property. And yet, if the backdoor theory holds, the entry point that mattered was not the one being watched. Security systems are designed around the threats we anticipate. Gates stop frontal entry. Cameras capture what they are pointed at. But a home canvassed over multiple weeks by someone who studies sight lines and learns which doors are habitually unlocked is not facing a threat that standard measures are built to address. The specific lesson from this case is not that security cameras are useless. It is that a camera covering one entrance creates a blind assumption about the others. Investigators flagged the side yard and backyard cameras, precisely because someone may have already been using those spaces. For anyone following this case and thinking about their own home, the question is not whether you have cameras. It is whether every possible point of entry is covered and whether your wireless devices have a local backup that a signal jammer cannot reach. Beyond the practical, this case raises a deeper question about what it means when a crime is this planned, this patient, and this difficult to crack despite overwhelming investigative resources, and what that tells us about the limits of even the most well-resourced systems. when someone has taken the time to understand them from the inside. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for more than 6 weeks. The FBI is still working. The DNA is still being processed. And the man with the leaves pressed against the camera is still unidentified. But the investigation has shifted. The question is no longer simply who was at the front door. The question is who was already inside and how they got there. If you have any information about this case, the FBI is asking you to call 1-800-CALL-FBI. Subscribe to Deadly Tales, Liam, and turn on notifications. This case is not over, and the next development could come at any time. And when it does, there is one more thread in this story that has barely been touched. The ransom notes, not the fake one, the others. What they say, what they reveal about who sent them, and what they might tell us about whether Nancy Guthrie is still alive. That is the next video.